porque como lo graban en YouTube, por favor. Muchas gracias. No, eso no. No, lo haríamos nosotros, no hay problema. ¿Quieres iniciar tú o quieres que inicie yo y te lo paso? Rebeca.
Pequeña pregunta, ¿puedo caminar un poco mientras estoy haciendo la presentación?
Sí. ¿Quieres que te consigamos un apuntador? Okay.
¿Qué necesitas?
Un apuntador. Si nos prestan el apuntador con...
Ahorita nos van a traer.
Sí, el apuntador y ya para que le...
Sí, no.
Rebeca, esta la tienes que firmar tú.
Eso ya tenía.
Bueno. Gracias. ¿Sí cabe? Ah, perfecto. Ya. Ok. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a comenzar la sesión del día de hoy. Les queremos agradecer a todos su visita al Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales. Esta es la segunda sesión del seminario que conjuntamente coordinamos con la UAM Iztapalapa, el Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales y la Facultad de Economía, el Posgrado de Economía de la UNAM. Afortunadamente es el segundo evento que tenemos de esta naturaleza, el cual ha sido muy exitoso en términos de la participación. Bueno, estamos muy agradecidos también con la aceptación de este seminario del doctor Pier-Paolo Saviotti, quien seguramente ya conocen. Haremos solamente una breve presentación. El profesor Saviotti es Visiting Research Fellow in Innovation Studies at the Copernicus Institute Faculty of Geoscience en Utrecht University. Bueno, es autor de muy distintas presentaciones y temas de investigación sobre technological evolución, variedad de economía. En realidad tenemos 3 presentaciones, no sé si la de el día de ayer la tengan en YouTube, pero seguramente la del día de hoy se estará grabando y en unos días estará disponible en la página. Vamos a tener la presentación el día de hoy, la tercera es el día de mañana a las 4 de la tarde en el Salón 207 del Posgrado de la Facultad de Economía. Esta es una actividad como parte de las actividades que tiene el Seminario de Estudios Interdisciplinarios de la Ciencia, la Tecnología y la Innovación, que coordina la doctora Rebeca de Gortari, el doctor Eduardo Robles y yo. Bueno, le doy la palabra a la doctora Rebeca para que nos dirija algo y comenzaremos inmediatamente.
Bueno, antes que nada, agradecerle al doctor Pier-Paolo Saviotti la invitación a venir aquí a México. Yo creo que es muy importante, no solamente para los economistas, sino yo creo que para todas las disciplinas sociales. El otro asunto que quiero mencionar solamente es que para nosotros es un honor también tenerlo aquí como parte de nuestro Seminario de Estudios Interdisciplinarios en Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación. Aprovecho este espacio para decirles que es un seminario que ya está cumpliendo casi 7 años, lo tenemos prácticamente una vez al mes y al cual están invitados investigadores, estudiantes de posgrado, y hemos aprovechado estas oportunidades de personajes tan importantes como el doctor Saviotti para participar en este seminario. Están todos invitados a este seminario, al seminario nuestro. Si quieren hacer alguna presentación, por favor, antes de salir, pongan su nombre y sus datos, porque con eso vamos a poderlos seguir y ustedes nos pueden seguir en nuestra página. Muchas gracias y le damos la palabra al doctor Saviotti.
Okay. Bueno, voy a comenzar con algunas palabras en español, después voy a hacer la presentación en inglés, pero si quieren hacer preguntas al final en español, va todo bien, ¿no? Entonces quiero antes de todo agradecerle a los organizadores, ¿no?, de estas tres presentaciones, la invitación, porque no solo me dio la posibilidad de ver una vez más a México, a la Ciudad de México, sino que estas tres presentaciones están relacionadas, ¿no? Son parte de trabajo que yo hice en los últimos 15 años, ¿no?, esencialmente, y son todas incluidas en un libro que estamos escribiendo con mi colega Morris Teuber, ¿no?, que va a salir en algún momento, espero al principio del año próximo. Siempre se retrasa un poquito, pero un momento va a llegar. Y entonces es importante, ¿no?, de poder ver un poco, digamos, varias cosas en conjunto. El hecho de escribir un libro, por ejemplo, es diferente con respecto a escribir artículos, ¿no? Yo sé que ustedes, por ejemplo, los jóvenes investigadores, no pueden escribir libros porque no sirven mucho, ¿no?, para la carrera. Pero yo creo que en las ciencias sociales es importante también escribir libros. Entonces, como yo ahora no tengo más enlaces muy rígidos institucionales, tengo un poco más de libertad, ¿no? Y comencé a escribir más libros y menos artículos. Ok, voy a comenzar. Y si no le molesta, puedo caminar un poquito porque las ideas fluyen mejor. Then the main topic of today is structural change, differentiation, and economic development. Okay, I think that you all know what is structural change. Okay, maybe I can propose a slightly different interpretation of it during this presentation. But then we can discuss whether you agree or not with that different conception. ¿Me escuchan? Okay, perfecto. Now, structural change, there has been a literature on structural change, since at least the 1950s. It has been particularly important amongst Latin American economists, Latin American structuralists. But the literature of the 1950s conceived structural change in a way that is narrower than the one that I'm going to use, in my presentation. In past literature, structural change was conceived as a change in the share of output of each sector and how it varied in the course of time. Okay? Which is part of structural change, of what I will tell you, but it is not all. Okay? I'm going to use a broader version of structural change and to show that economic development, as we can observe it, could never have occurred without structural change in the way that I'm going to define it. Okay? And the word differentiation gives you an idea of where I'm aiming at. Okay? Because I will try to show that not only the structure of the economic system needs to change in order for economic development to continue, but it changes in a particular way by increasing the differentiation of the economic system. And that is necessary. It is not just that by chance, that differentiation occurs. Okay? No. Okay, first of all, what is the structure of an economic system, or of a system in general? In fact, I start using, the term socioeconomic systems, and you will see why, given the definition that I'm using, let's say. Essentially, the structure is the components of the systems and their interactions, okay? Whereby components we can mean, for example, different industrial sectors, which were typically the components used in the past, but also institutions such as, for example, the system of medical care that there is, the labor markets that there are in particular countries, the education system. They are all related and they all contribute to the economic development, okay? In a way that was not taken into account by the early literature, okay? In a way, they would probably have said, but these further components that you introduce are not economic components. And I say, well, they are not economic components, but they do have an important economic implication. They affect the way in which even the most traditional sectors work, okay? If you want, you can think simply about, the healthcare system. Well, how would pharmaceutical firms react if from today to tomorrow one decided to eliminate, the healthcare system? Or if, for example, all the education system that we have were to disappear overnight, how would firms, even in the most traditional sectors, find, their manpower and so forth, okay? So the kind of structural change that I mean, that is a change in any of these components or in their interactions, okay? Now, okay, that's I've already said. The other important consideration is to say that it's important for us to try and understand long-term economic developments, okay? Now, if there are any economists here, they could raise their hand and say, well, maybe that is not so important, because as you remember, Keynes said, that in the long run we are all dead, right? And he was saying that at a certain moment when he created his theory that then allowed, after the Second World War, to rescue economies, from recessions and so forth, because there were more immediate needs, and he couldn't wait, for the system to reach equilibrium if it took, 50 or more years, because all people who were unemployed would have died, starved, and so forth. But there are several tendencies within the economic system that have intrinsically long periods of development. For example, if you've heard about, industry life cycles, okay? The life cycle of an industry like automobiles lasts, started at the beginning of the 20th century, and is still going on. It's not finished even now, but even if you look at the most conventional part of the curve that describes it, it's 60, 70 years, etc. So, and there are also, for example, some technologies which are emerging now. You all have certainly read, that artificial intelligence is developing, very rapidly, and it could have an important influence, on the level of employment that there is, in the economic system, in the system, and so forth. So we cannot simply look at what is happening in the very short run, although that may be very important, let's say, as Keynes has pointed out, But I say that if we don't look at the long run, we might be dead long before the long run arrives, okay? You need to plan, to start studying, preparing for the emergence of new technologies, or new forms of communication and so forth, okay? So there is a reason for which, it's important for us to look at structural change, which is in a sense more difficult. There are more inherent uncertainties, but it's important again to be ready when the changes that are beginning to happening now arrive, at a larger scale, let's say. And this is particularly important because our societies are mostly driven by innovation. They're not driven by one particular innovation which occurs at a particular time and then stops or goes through its life cycle and everything goes back, to a peaceful equilibrium. There is a continuous stream of innovations that are appearing and changing the world, and each innovation then moves at a different speed, in particular sectors, but the system is always dynamic and evolving, and changing its structure. And the structure of the system has an impact on its future development, okay? If you miss, for example, let's say, certain industries, then at a certain time to create them in a country or a region, okay? Then when you try to catch up, you find that barriers have become much higher than it was the case in the early phases of the development, okay? And so it's important, to be ready and have, some sort of absorption capacity for emerging industries. One concept that for me is very important and that is not very much stressed usually in economics textbooks is that of qualitative change, okay? Now you have things, there are lots of components, of the economic system, objects, artifacts that are produced in different industrial sectors that are qualitatively different. Just to quote an example that is very simple, a pair of shoes, in the computer are not the same thing and they cannot be classified in an industrial classification system in the same category and so forth, okay? Because not only they are different at a certain time, but their development path in future is likely to be very different. Okay, so and then what we do, we create systems of industrial classification in which we put particular activities that are similar together in particular categories, and the number of categories that exist, it depends on how many different and distinguishable activities there are in the economic system. And I will try to show that it is important for the system to generate a growing variety of new activities, because in that way it can keep growing, otherwise growth could actually stop, okay? The presence of qualitative change is also important because it gives a different meaning to the concept of efficiency, okay? You certainly, all of you must have an idea of what efficiency is, and I think that you've all read newspapers saying, that it is important for productivity to keep increasing, if growth is going to continue. Now, what is productivity? Well, typically journalists interpret it as efficiency, but it is not the case, or at least it is not only efficiency. What we measure as productivity is a combination of efficiency and value, okay? Now, how then do I define efficiency? Well, the efficiency of a given process, for example, of the production of shoes, okay, increases if to make one pair of shoes, for example, you need fewer inputs in order to produce one pair of shoes. But the pair of shoes that you produce has to remain qualitatively constant. If you change the type of shoes and you move from a very simple one, to a very complex one, more luxurious, more expensive, in which you expect, to be able to make more profits, but then you are changing simultaneously the efficiency and the value of the process, okay? And when you measure productivity, you measure that mixture of efficiency and value, okay? Now, the two are related, as I will tell you very soon, okay? But they're not the same thing. You cannot say that productivity is simply efficiency. That is a mistake, So we need something else, okay? Because if we had an economic system that had a constant number of activities and of outputs, okay, and in which the only thing that happened in the course of time was an increasing efficiency, then what I'm going to try to say is that the economic system could not keep going, okay? Why would that be? Well, the reason for that was revealed to me a long time ago by a book written by Luigi Pasinetti in the early 1980s. In fact, it was his PhD thesis, so, well. What he was saying is that essentially within each industrial sector, you have two trends all the times, One is a trend towards, he called it growing productivity, but I will call it growing efficiency, okay? That keeps growing, because we have technical change, that allows us, to produce more efficiently the same things that were already there in the past. And then there is demand, because of course, if you were to produce lots of things that nobody wants, then the system would not continue, okay? So you need a demand that can absorb more or less all what is produced, with particular fluctuations, but by and large in the long run. But Pasinetti said, extrapolating what Engel had observed in the 19th century,
say, demand tends to saturate, okay? When the sector is new, no one has, when computers were something new, no one had any of them, so the market for computers was just emerging. It was being created, and at the beginning it was an empty market, and so sales were very, very rapid, if the price for them was right. But now, for example, the market for computers is almost saturated, so they are not as interesting and as dynamic as it was the case before. So Pasinetti assumed that in all sectors, demand would grow rapidly when a new sector was introduced, but it would then saturate. Demand was going to remain flat. Okay? Now, if that happened, you would have a situation in which simultaneously you had growing efficiency, which would continuously reduce the labor power and other inputs required to produce one unit of output, and demand that saturated. And of course, that means that in the course of time, you would have become able to produce all demanded output with a declining proportion of the labor force. And I let you imagine what sort of problem that would have constituted. He called it a bottleneck, in economic development. But he said that technical change had the possibility to compensate for this potential bottleneck, and therefore, in fact, the displacement of labor that was potentially present, with increasing efficiency, had never been observed, because simultaneously with, let's say, growing efficiency, there was creativity, this is a term that I'm using, that created new outputs, new activities, and the emergence of these new sectors mopped up, so to say, absorbed the potential potential displacement of labor that would have been created by the growing efficiency of pre-existing sectors. Okay, so you need simultaneously efficiency and creativity. If only one of the two existed, the system would not work, and would not work in the way that we can observe. Well, I've explained why efficiency alone would not be sufficient. But then, even creativity requires some resources. Creativity, for example, research and development is part of creative activities. And creative activities need to pay creative people. Okay? Need resources of various types. Where are these resources to come from? And the resources come from the surplus that is generated by the growing efficiency in previous pre-existing sectors. So the two are complementary, and they go well together, or they have gone well together until so far, till now, almost now. So there's never been serious unemployment, in spite of the fact that even the early classical economists, David Ricardo, which started, let's say, worrying about the potential impact of automation and mechanization on employment, in fact, if you look at the historical record, there's no case, of employment that was due uniquely or predominantly to automation. When there were bouts of unemployment, as after the 1929 crisis or after the 2007 crisis, let's say, it was due to other factors and not only to changes in technology and changes in efficiency. This I will skip for a moment, because it's just a way of telling you that you can compare, let's say, a development path which includes structural change to a development path which has no structural change. Okay? If no structural change occurred, and if there were only growing efficiency, leaving aside the bottleneck and other things, you would have no structural change, in the sense that all the existing sectors would develop at exactly the same speed, and their share of output would be exactly the same in the course of time. So the economy would only become bigger, but not effectively change structure. Okay? But what we see, the kind of statistics that we have about economic development during the 20th century, tell us that the rates of development of different sectors are extremely different, and even for the same sector, they differ along the life cycle of the sector. Okay? So structural change is observed. Okay? Now the problem is to see whether it is observed as something that adds on top of, independently of economic development, or whether it is the fundamental mechanism that leads to the continuation of economic development. And of course, I espouse this latter solution, you know. Now, the presence of qualitative change, okay, is important, because new sectors that are distinguishable from those that existed before only arise if there is a radical innovation that creates something qualitatively different from anything that existed before. But qualitative change in this sense gives rise to radical uncertainty, and radical uncertainty is defined as uncertainty that does not allow you to predict what sort of things are going to emerge, and even at the very beginning of the life cycle of new industries and technologies, how they will develop in future. Okay? So it creates, you know, a sort of uncertainty that is, in principle, impossible to overcome completely. Because if we could know what innovations are going to come up next, and know it exactly, we could write some algorithm that told us, you know, when these innovations will come up and what sort of outcome they will have. There would be no uncertainty. The concept of radical uncertainty was introduced by Frank Knight in 1921, again in his PhD thesis. But he said, well, it's a difficulty, but it is the source of profit. Because if there were no uncertainty, no one could make profits. If everything was to be known exactly to everyone, okay? Who would have been able to make any profits? What sort of room would there have been, you know, for entrepreneurs, for Schumpeterian entrepreneurs that typically create innovations or introduce innovations into the economic system in a situation of high uncertainty, okay? And not of calculable risk, because in the economics literature there's been a lot of work about risk, but risk that has been calculated in probabilistic terms, which still leaves some uncertainty, but it's much easier to deal with. You know how things are going to go, you know, let's say. You can calculate different probabilities for different development paths, etc., okay? So then, discontinuities are created by the emergence of qualitative change, and they are not just a preoccupation for philosophers, you know, because there is one example that I often use. The pharmaceutical industry in the 1970s had to switch its knowledge base from organic chemistry to biotechnology as the knowledge base that would allow it to produce new drugs, okay, new medicines and the like. Okay. Now that was a shock, because at a certain moment pharmaceutical firms had all their R&D employees were chemists, you know, and knew organic chemistry, but they did not know biotechnology, you know. And so they had to replace all of these, you know, many of these, you know, with biologists, you know, that at that time, you know, in fact, were part of an emerging discipline, and there were not even many of them about, you know. So that is an important discontinuity, in fact, you know, that it affects the way firms have to organize their competencies to hire them and so forth, okay? It is important for new technologies, for new sectors, new activities to emerge, but when they do emerge, immediately they can represent both a source of opportunities, but also a barrier in this case, you know, in the sense that firms need to change competencies. So growth is only a quantitative measure of what happens within the system. Okay? It's really totally macroeconomic, you know, in the sense that you look at the system from outside, you see if it grows or if it doesn't grow. Okay? But now, structural change is important because it is required in order for growth to continue. If there was no structural change, if there was only efficiency growth, okay, then economic growth, economic development would continue, would stop. Okay? Now, from now on, what I'm going to tell is part of the work that I've been doing with my colleague Andrea Spica, and more recently with Bogan-Guillaume, in a model of economic development, which is largely based on structural change, that we constructed. Now, what we found, let's say, as empirical ways of representing, let's say, stylized facts, in the economic development that had occurred, let's say, since from the Industrial Revolution to the present, is 3 trajectories, okay? Trajectories are long-term trends that are observed by everything that happens, within the economic system, okay? Yeah. No, that's not this one. Yeah. Now, so the first trajectory is growing efficiency. Efficiency is growing the whole time. Okay? Today, to make a car or a pair of shoes, you need a lot less labor than it was the case in the past. Although I think that labor productivity is more important than other types of productivity, but even capital productivity is increasing, the use of raw materials is decreasing, and so forth, okay? So efficiency has been increasing the whole time. This is an important long-term trajectory, yeah? At least since the Industrial Revolution, this has always been happening, but that we observe that there's been a growing output variety, okay? So the number of distinguishable activities, that allow us to describe the economic system has been increasing in the course of time, okay? There are many more sectors, than, for example, before the year 1900, you didn't have production of cars, of aircraft, of televisions, of portable telephones and whatnot, of computers and the like, okay? And so there are always new outputs, new artifacts that are being added to the economic system, and that increase its differentiation. Okay? But there's another way, another mechanism. This, in fact, is the sort of mechanism that Pasinetti thought was important, to compensate, for growing efficiency. But there's another mechanism that Pasinetti had not foreseen, that is growing output, quality, and intra-sector differentiation. Within its sector, they don't keep producing, the same type of output all the time, let's say, but they produce outputs, that are very heterogeneous, provide services of different types and change, and they have a wide range of, let's say, products. So I'll give you some examples of a pure efficiency process, of a pure variety change process in the sense of a pure product diversification. Okay? Now the first one is an example that comes from the textile industry, which was the leading industry at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Okay? Now, before the Industrial Revolution, if you wanted to make a thread that was later going to be used to make tissues and the like, you used what is called a spinning wheel. Okay? There was, at the center of the wheel, a spindle, around which the spinner, who had to be a relatively skilled person, wound the thread, starting from cotton or wool as a raw material. Okay? These two machines are some of the most important innovations that occurred during the Industrial Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution. This is the spinning jenny. Okay? Now, the spinning jenny has a wheel, but then you have many spindles simultaneously. Okay? And if you think, if the wheel turns at the same speed as the spinning wheel, then you, instead of having one spindle, you have 20. At one go, you have multiplied efficiency by 20. No joke, huh? Try to multiply efficiency by 20 today in any industry, and you would make, the owner of the firm extremely happy, although probably they would have to fire a lot of employees. The other one is the mule, which is a later machine, okay? And has even more spindles, which in fact are powered by some kind of energy that was either water or steam, but they turn a lot faster than the spinning wheel, let's say. So the increase in efficiency has been enormous, in what has been the first prototypical industry of the Industrial Revolution. If you assume that the thread which is obtained is the same, then there's no change in the output, qualitative change, and so it's pure efficiency, a pure efficiency change. Now this is an example of growing output variety. The drawing is mine. Okay? It is applied to the what you could call the transport technology, including all the forms that can be used. Okay? Now this is the first transport technology. It's F for food. Okay? we started walking. That was the first transport technology that we had. But then there are other ones, that came later, okay? For example, this is HC's horse-driven coaches, that until the end of the 19th century were a very important transport technology. But then during the 20th century, well, in fact, before that, in the mid-19th century, trains started becoming, basically displaying, horse-driven coaches. And then during the 20th century, we had cars, motorcycles, and bicycles. Actually ships were present, from the antiquity, but, of course, a Roman ship, was a very small thing, 20 or 30 meters long with some oars, etc. And then if you take, one of these big ships that today carry around, 5,000-6,000 passengers to visit, places around the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, well, they are quite a different animal. And then aircraft is another type of transport technologies. There are some more being, muted that I did. I would have put, for example, helicopters together with aircraft, but they are now studying, what is called air taxis, okay? That are like bigger drones, okay, with many small propellers, driven by an electric motor that could go around in cities, carrying very busy passengers, who have to skip from the airport, to the hotel in the center of the city in 20 minutes, and don't want to bother with traffic and other things, that people like us have to worry with every day. But even leaving these other developments aside, as you can see, the differentiation of transport technologies increased a lot, and quite recently, because this space is centuries and centuries in which not much changed. Now, then this is the intra-industry diversification which occurred. Okay, now this is the 1910 or thereabouts Ford Model T. Okay, that was the prototypical car. It was not the only one even then. But then, if we skip to the 1950s, you already had quite a range of different cars. This is a Rolls-Royce, the most luxurious car that there was around. This is a big American car. And this is the smallest Italian car. This is exactly like the one, like my father's first car. Okay? It only carried 2 passengers and 2 children behind, no other. But now, there were perhaps more than 4 models, but not many more. Each firm only produced 2 or 3 models. These are examples from a sample of 2014, but if you take a technical magazine, you see that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different versions of cars that go from very, very small ones, let's say, to extremely luxurious or extremely fast. So there's been an enormous process of diversification, but it is not specific to, let's say, cars only. If you look at portable telephones, I wonder if there is anyone here who can tell me how many different telephone models Samsung is making now. I think it's almost impossible. You have to be a professional that is doing that all the time. Okay, so you have these 2 different processes of diversification at different levels of aggregation that occur in the course of time. Okay, now. In addition to what Pasinetti was saying, even internal diversification can contribute to compensate for growing efficiency. Because, for example, Volkswagen makes very expensive car models in Germany and very cheap ones in other countries, that have lower labor cost. Okay, so that allows, the firm to have a wider range of models, and to have a wider market available. Okay, so. But in fact, you can have in different innovation systems, different development paths, systems that tend to privilege the emergence of new sectors. The United States is the typical example, and care less about mature sectors, or other systems, that tend to try to maintain, more mature sectors competitive in the course of time, either for choice or for lack of ability to enter the new fields. So, in fact, the problem is that you can have multiple development paths. Okay? This is only one of the sources of multiple development paths. It is not the only one. There are other reasons for which, economic development can follow a number of paths. Not all of paths can actually lead to development. But if you look at real data, there are no two countries that had exactly the same kind of development path. So there is a range of paths, which may be conducive to economic development. If you move outside that range, then you have problems and you cannot continue developing. Now, what I showed you before, the process of diversification within each sector, it can actually be described, represented analytically by, let's say, have to repeat. Well, we're done. Right. Every material object that is made, okay, is made by taking raw materials from nature, okay? Iron ore, bauxite, plastics that come from oil, other materials, rare earths, for example, to put into telephones or other things, okay? And they are purified and combined in an order that allows them to produce services that are useful for us. We don't want to buy the raw materials that are in the object. They are of no interest to us. What we want is to have computing power, communication power, and so forth. Okay? So every material object, every artifact has these two dimensions, a dimension that is linked to the physical world and to the laws of nature, and a dimension that is in relation to the services that it has to perform for citizens, people, users, consumers, and the like. And the two are related. Okay, well, each sector in our model is defined, as producing a product that is unique, but it can be very highly diversified in this sense, okay? Okay, this I've already told you, and so forth. Okay, now I'll briefly describe, what is the basis of our model, because we have examined different phenomena in different articles, okay? By and large, we have, a number of sectors which is not fixed in the course of time. It is endogenously variable. Okay? It varies as the system develops, and in fact it is this variation in the number of sectors that keeps the system developing. In each sector is created by a Schumpeterian entrepreneur who introduces a new an innovation into the market. Okay? The innovation creates the market. The entrepreneur does it in the expectation of a temporary monopoly. Because when the first entrepreneur creates the market, there's no one else, the market can be very large. Imagine, when Steve Jobs and the other, created, the personal computer in a garage in Palo Alto. Okay? Well, how many personal computers have been sold in the whole world? Billions. Okay? So it was a huge market. At the time when they were working on it in a garage, it was a potential market. Let's say nobody knew about it. There could be no customers. Let's say, but then it had an enormous potential market. Okay, so in fact, this is a case of a Schumpeterian entrepreneur that knowingly or unknowingly, creates an innovation that gives him or her an enormous temporary monopoly. Temporary because if the first entrepreneur is successful, there will be a bandwagon of imitators, as Schumpeter was saying, that imitates, but that will enlarge the size of the realized market, not of the potential one, but will gradually eat away the temporary monopoly, up to the point where the sector, what was an innovating sector at the beginning, becomes one more of the routines of the economic system, or what Schumpeter called the circular flow. The set of routines that keep ticking in the system all the time, and so forth, let's say. So this is what occurs within each sector, okay, the foundation. And what happens, what happens to each sector is that the number of firms then starts from very little, from the first firm, and then if there is a bandwagon of imitators, then the number of firms increases, but then it reaches a point, where the intensity of competition has become the same as in more mature sectors, and then there's no more point in entering, then in fact some firms will start leaving the system, exit, either because they are no longer competing or simply because they think it is no longer worthwhile for them to remain. But then how then does the process continue? Well, because the saturation of the previous incumbent sector will be a signal for other potential entrepreneurs to create new innovations which will give rise to other sectors. Okay? And this is what you could see in the figure. Okay? When the first sector starts saturating, then a second sector is created, and so forth. And all sectors follow a life cycle. Or at least those of you who are economists know that there's been a literature on the industry life cycle. But we did not ask our system, our model, to produce industry life cycle. It just came out of the basic conditions, that exist, the creation of novelty, innovation, competition, and demand, and so forth. Okay. So the inter-industry dynamics is the emergence of new sectors that tends to coincide with the saturation of the previous ones. Okay? And so the system keeps going. As soon as sector becomes mature, saturated, etc., there are incentives, to set up inducements to set up a further sector. If then there are enough ideas available, okay, enough patents in the pot of patents that is available at the time, then the system will keep developing in that way. We have a particular version of competition which depends on outputs being heterogeneous and supplying services, okay? So we have competition within each sector, which is the traditional one that you learn about when you study economics, but there's potentially even competition between different sectors. Okay? Well, for example, if you think about airlines, trains, buses, etc., they all compete for passengers, within certain distances, and you have the choice of using one or the other. Okay? So there are different industries typically, but there is inter-industry competition, which is somewhat akin to market contestability, an idea that was put forward, by Baumol in the 1970s or 1980s, saying, that even if one sector exists and it is a monopoly, it is never completely free from competition because there is always potential entry. Now, it did not specify this mechanism, but there is potential entry because, for example, firms that had competencies, that allow them to enter an existing market could actually enter. If you want to have an example of this, is the market for photographic cameras. Okay? Up to a point, up to the 1990s, photographic cameras were made based, on a chemical process, on which, there was a stuff that was photosensitive, and when it was exposed to light, it would receive, light in different, let's say, intensities and colors, and it would create an image of what, the camera was exposed to. Now, these cameras exist only in, let's say, in the houses of people who had bought them before the transition, which entirely wiped out this technology. What you have now, no more film, no more chemical process, but you have sensors within the camera that are electronic sensors that can catch, the distribution of light pixels and reconstruct an image. Okay? And it's a completely different structure. And there have been, therefore, new firms from industries that were not the photographic industry, that were mostly electronics firms, Sony, for example, or Panasonic, that have become some of the most important producers of cameras, okay? Because they were competent in the new internal structure of the photographic camera. Those of you who have read Schumpeter's work know that creative destruction is probably the most famous of Schumpeterian concepts, okay? Now, creative destruction means, that innovations create something new that can be beneficial for some, but not for everyone, okay? If you were, for example, a producer of photographic cameras of the old style, you were not very happy you probably know that Kodak, which was one of the first producers of photographic cameras, no longer exists. It has been wiped out completely in the transition towards, digital cameras. So that is creative destruction. Okay? Now, Professor Gutmann yesterday was asking me to compare our model, to endogenous growth models, and I very immodestly at the end ended saying ours is a lot better, let's say. But I will try to tell you why. But it can actually come also in part from the analysis of the creative destruction. Okay. Now, if it is true that the variety of the economic system increases in the course of time, and it needs to increase in order to maintain economic development in the long run, then of course there is more creation than destruction. Because the number of new activities must be greater than the number of activities that disappear, by definition. So there is destruction, but there seems to be more creation than destruction. But perhaps that is not the entire truth, in the sense that even the old sectors that survive don't keep employing the same number of people to produce the same things. Okay? In fact, I once missed an opportunity to observe an Audi plant in a small German town because my train arrived late for a conference, and I could not visit. But the people who went, told me that they couldn't see a worker around in the plant. There were just robots. There were workers around, but there was the cook of the restaurant, the person who was locking the doors and things like that. So in fact, that is destruction. Okay? Employment is destroyed very rapidly in some sectors. Then the capacity of the system to create new types of employment is essential to compensate for this destruction. Okay? Now, even if macroeconomically we see that there is no unemployment, it is not true that there are no sufferings, let's say. For example, during the Industrial Revolution in the textile industry, the total employment increased, but there were some types of competencies which were completely wiped out. Then I think people who were employed, to use those particular competencies were not particularly happy about, Or in ways of generating energy, you certainly know that there have been many coal mines that have been closed. There were coal mines in Wales, parts of Britain, and there was one coal mine in town, closed. So that there is destruction of this type, no doubt, so in a sense, once we know that that is bound to happen, we have to design institutions that allow us to compensate the people who are the victims, of this destruction. But we had started constructing this model because when I went to work in the University of Manchester and I started reading about models of growth, then they were purely macroeconomic, so by definition a macroeconomic model doesn't tell you what is the mechanism, it just tells you, that if you put together capital and labor, you shake, and if you increase the amount of capital and labor, you increase the amount of output. But then it turned out, that there was a lot of growth that was unexplained by this in the famous paper by Solow. Anyway, even that was not convincing because what I thought is, we not only have increasing efficiency, but there are lots of the objects that we can observe around ourselves, these two things that I'm using, our portable telephones, cars, etc., that did not exist before the 20th century, let's say. But they must have played a role. They create a lot of employment at certain times, And they've not completely displaced, let's say, the food industry, for example, still exists, or building houses and things like that, let's say. So I started searching for a mechanism that could explain, the sort of macroeconomic developments that were observed. And then Pasinetti offered me the first, clue, for an explanation. But then we tried to create a model with a technique which was substantially different from the one that Pasinetti has used due to limitations were typical at this time. Essentially, Pasinetti used a modified input-output model. But that allowed him only to say that the system defined in a particular way with a certain number of sectors of activities is not going to be able to continue, let's say, to develop indefinitely, you know? But, you know, when you use an input-out model, you have a matrix, you know, with a fixed number of columns and of rows, you know, let's say. So you cannot increase it, you know, or if you have it increase it ad hoc, you know. If you see that a new sector emerges, after it has been emerging, you know, you add a new line and a new row, for example, etc. You know? So what we tried is to create a model in which the number of sectors would increase endogenously, and that if the number of sectors increased endogenously, that would have allowed employment to remain constant or to increase. And these are the local, let's say, sectoral employment curves that show that in each sector employment increases, but then tends to decrease and become very low in the course of time. But if you put together the various, you know, employment curves, you have a trend that can be positive, you know, that can even lead to growing aggregate employment. It is not certain. No? If you don't have new ideas for entrepreneurs, you know, to create new sectors, then the system will grind to a halt, etc. But it can, if there are these new ideas available. Okay, so this can compensate. The emergence of new sectors can compensate, you know, for increasing efficiency. So we were very happy. That was our first important result. You know, that meant, you know, that we were relatively correct in creating this model. And to give you an idea that we were not totally wrong, I'll show you some empirical results about the development of South Korea. Now remember, South Korea is one of the most, let's say, of the best examples of economic development that we've had after the Second World War, okay, let's say. Now, these are, let's say, percentages of output of different sectors, you know, at different time. And already you can see for the composition that some of the older sectors tend to shrink and to occupy less and less share, let's say, a smaller and smaller share of output, okay? And new sectors appear that did not exist at all before, okay? And this is the empirical curve for the various sectors. And it is not very different from ours, okay? So that was a great satisfaction, you know, to see that our model could, if not predict, explain something, you know, because, well, right. So, in summary, the long-term continuation of economic development requires the system, the economic system, to keep differentiating and diversifying its output, okay? Now, can I entertain you for a little more, or are you tired enough, you know, to ask me to stop?
There you go.
Okay.
You keep on telling.
A few more minutes. Okay. Now, at a point I mentioned, you know, that you needed two conditions, you know, for each sector to develop and for the economy to keep developing, you know. You had to create innovations, you know. But if no one buys the products which are embodied in your innovations, you know, then there will be no economic development. Innovation will have no impact on economic development. Okay, and so I think we started working on the coevolution of innovation and demand. Coevolution means, you know, that in a given process of economic development, you have two variables, in this case, one which represents innovation, what represents demand, you know. And if one of the two grows, that induces growth of the other, which feeds back growth in the first one. You know, there is a positive feedback loop that accelerates the emergence of new sectors, okay? And I'll show you something very interesting that we found by trying to study the evolution of innovation, the coevolution of innovation and demand, okay? Now, this is an empirical diagram which shows the distribution of the expenditures of working class families in the UK in the 19th century, from the 1830s but up to the 1950s, okay? Now remember that during this period, Britain was the richest country in the world. Perhaps towards the end it was second to the United States, but it was not a poor country. It was the first country that had done the Industrial Revolution. Now what does each bar contain? You know? The black part is the share of expenditures in food. This is rent, fuel and light, so housing, etc., and clothing. Okay? what is left over, which here is less than 20% in white, is what we would call disposable income, okay? With which people could buy something else, than the three necessities that are biological necessities, as were described by the colored part of the bar, okay? So there was very little left over, really, once you had gone to the pub once a week, maybe, and you had drunk your pint of beer, there was not much left, And if you were able then to sell them bicycles, or portable telephones, no one would have had the purchasing power to buy them, okay? Now, this is 1899, and not only there's been no more, let's say, disposable income, but less, okay? So workers were even more squeezed now than before. And the same thing continued until the First World War. So our friend Karl Marx, at least on this, was completely right, let's say. But then if you look at what happened, after the First World War and even after the Second World War, is that the white part, that is disposable income, becomes quite large. It's about 40% at this point. So the necessities that are biological necessities accounted at that time for 60%. Now bear in mind that today, a typical family, let's say in a country like Britain or the United States, spends between 10 and 20% on food, and therefore that disposable income is even larger, But then that allows us to buy things, like cars, portable telephones, televisions, to have holidays, in Honolulu or in Taiwan or whatever it is, let's say. And so there's been a transition, okay, that we called from necessities to imaginary worlds, because all the new products or services that could then purchase with that disposable income were not biological necessities, they were invented. Part of our artificial economy became larger and larger. And today, probably in many cases, the artificial economy occupies more than 50% of our budgets, family budgets, and the like, let's say. Now, I don't want to bother you with formulas, but just to tell you that this is demand, okay? And this is search activities, which is a generalized analog of research and development. That means, that firms or even countries increase R&D expenditures as demand, for certain types of outputs increases, okay? So you create innovations, and then if innovations sell well, then you keep increasing your search activities that lead to new innovations and the like. So there is a co-evolution of, let's say, this. No, actually, there's something interesting in there. Then that keeps the system going. Let's say, this is just to tell you that, exaggerating a little, we can represent all economic activity as either routines or search activities, okay? With some kind of intermediate sort of activities, which are not entirely routinized, but contain some element of search, So there's been this transition from necessities that dominated the consumption of working class families until the end of the 19th century to imaginary worlds that account, for a larger and larger part, of our consumption. So we did something interesting. Now, there is an answer to the question, why 120 years after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, say, working class families in Britain still had, such a low share of their expenditures on, let's say, things other than necessities. It seemed as if, they had not improved at all, which is a bit of an exaggeration. They were, if you look at the consumption, for example, of sugar and tea, it had increased even for working class families, but not beyond that, let's say. But economic historians have given us an answer, but we think it's not the only answer, and I'll tell you what is our additional, not alternative answer. Well, the answer given by economic historians is that during the 19th century, the population of Britain increased so rapidly that the increasing population basically ate all the results of increasing efficiency of economic activity, and therefore, in terms of GDP per capita, for example, of actual purchasing power individually, it could not have improved things more. But then we found something which I think is at least as interesting. When we try to carry out an experiment, see, when you have empirical data, you have empirical data about what happened. You know? Now we have a model, and so we can imagine things, you know, that have not taken place. You know, thus, you know, could the world have developed in a different way if things had gone along another development path? Okay. Then we imagine to compare two systems. You know, one which we call low quality, okay, in which the number of activities increased. But within each new activity, a new sector, the product would not change at all during the life cycle. Okay? So if we were considering cars, we would buy today cars that would cost maybe $25 or $30 given the increase in efficiency, but it would still be identical, you know, to the Ford Model T, you know, that was produced in 1910. Okay? And then we compared it, you know, to another scenario, okay, in which not only there were new sectors emerging, but within each sector, the average quality of products and the average differentiation would increase. Now, this quality and differentiation are represented by the services, you know, that are produced, you know, by each product, okay, and the range of services that are produced. You know. So here we have two curves that resulted from this comparison. This is the curve for employment, the variation of employment in the course of time. This is the low quality. That is, if all the sectors had continued to produce exactly the same product, only with a growing efficiency. And in fact, paradoxically, they would have created much more employment than if they had started producing, you know, products of variable quality and with a large range, you know, of services. Okay. Now, this, on the other hand, looks at income growth as it was generated by the two scenarios. And again, you see that in the early years after the Industrial Revolution, you know, in our model, let's say, the low quality scenario, that is always Ford Model T and nothing else, okay, and other sectors that kept producing the same product, would, at the beginning, they produced a higher income, okay? But that higher income would be overtaken by that obtained by producing, you know, higher quality products, okay? Now, the actual development curve that you can observe looks like a combination of this plus this, okay? So high quality products only started being available after the white part of the bar, let's say, became large. Okay? Now, the explanation is that, you know, the initial efficiency was too low, okay? And it would not have allowed, you know, to produce high quality products, you know, at prices that were available, you know, to working class people. But with increasing efficiency and something else, then it actually managed, you know, to produce products, you know, that created more income, okay, than the low quality ones. Now, this is the co-evolutionary mechanism that we propose to explain this transition, okay? Now, the transition is from necessities towards imaginary worlds that contain more differentiated and higher quality products. Okay? How could such a transition have occurred? Okay? If you want to produce, you know, products of very high quality, you need competencies that are more sophisticated than just, you know, very basic labor. Okay? And these competencies have to be trained, you know, by an education system expanded in some particular way. Okay? Now, if people have to study in order to acquire higher competencies, they need to pay higher wages, you know, otherwise they wouldn't go through the process of investing in education in order to have higher competencies. And also, the producers of higher quality products charge higher prices, okay? So then the higher wages create purchasing power. The higher prices allow firms to produce, you know, more sophisticated products. And the whole cycle goes on together, okay, along a virtuous cycle bearing in mind, that to create the new competencies, you needed to expand your education system, something which happened enormously after the Second World War, in the United States even before the Second World War, okay? So all these changes sort of reinforced one another, and then gave rise, to this mechanism of economic development, which was a very important component of, for example, what happened, after the Second World War, in which there was a period of high growth, and let's say of creation of wealth, that was even relatively well, let's say, distributed. Okay. Well, I'll stop here. What I have here is other material that, if you want to look at the presentation later, simply gives you an empirical confirmation that we were right in saying, that differentiation of the economic system need to increase in the course of time. There have been two types, of research traditions that have looked at this recently. In regional studies, they have looked at a lot at what they call related and unrelated variety. Okay. Trying to see which one was more important in terms of development at the regional level, and it's a flourishing literature that still now produces lots of new papers. And then on the other hand, there is a distinct literature which, using data on international trade, it has showed that again, let's say, developed countries produce much more differentiated and more complex products, and countries at lower levels of economic development produce less differentiated and less complex products. Okay? So in a way, we sort of preceded them and also explained, why this should happen, So, and now I think that, although it is not a certainty, because, but I think it's a relatively solid evidence, that starts being used for policy making and the like. Okay, thank you very much for your patience.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a abrir ahora una ronda de preguntas, comentarios y bueno, dependiendo del tiempo, vemos si nos da tiempo para una segunda ronda. Pero ahora tomaremos 3 participaciones. No sé si alguien quiere participar. 1, 2, una más, 3, 4 para esta ronda. Ok, entonces, por favor, si se presentan y nos dicen su nombre y de dónde nos visitan. Déjenme, ahorita les consigo. Ahí viene el micrófono. Sí, ya lo sé. Acá Diego.
Buenas tardes, profesor.
Buenas tardes.
Paolo. Mi nombre es Diego Ramírez, soy estudiante del Doctorado en Ciencias Económicas de la UAM, Xochimilco. Quisiera preguntarle, dentro de su modelo de coevolución entre demanda y innovación, digamos, parte también de algunos principios de la diferenciación entre sectores de productos. No sé si también lo han pensado, lo han reflexionado en relación con la diferenciación también de los consumidores, en el sentido de que estamos como la teoría evolucionista nos plantea, hay que ir a la realidad empírica y vemos que en realidad hay una gran diferenciación entre los diferentes consumidores. No sé si han incluido dentro de las variables la desigualdad, digamos, entre el consumo y el ingreso.
No incluimos explícitamente. Hay algo como el aumento del nivel de educación, que por cierto era necesario para poder enseñar a los consumidores, ¿no? a utilizar, por ejemplo, computadoras, teléfonos portátiles y todo, ¿no? Pero nada de más específico que eso, no.
Gracias. Leonardo, por favor.
Gracias. Buenas tardes, muchas gracias. Leonardo Sousa de la UAM. Yo quisiera preguntar, en esta teoría del cambio estructural, ¿hay alguna dependencia también con respecto a las instituciones?
Sí.
¿No? Que tienen que reaccionar con respecto a los cambios que se producen por el cambio técnico, ¿no?
Sí.
Nos mencionaba en alguna parte sobre las instituciones que participan tratando de reajustar el mercado de trabajo por las disrupciones y todos los cambios que se han puesto por el cambio técnico, ¿no?
Okay.
Pero también una parte muy importante es la parte de la incertidumbre, que en la teoría económica de la evolución es un tema fundamental, ¿no? En estas primeras partes, cuando surge una tecnología o un salto tecnológico bastante radical, pensando en nanotecnología, biología sintética, temas donde la incertidumbre es mucho mayor, ¿qué papel de coevolución tendrían ahí las instituciones? ¿Cómo podríamos reducir esa incertidumbre que puede provenir de muchos lados, ¿no? La incertidumbre desde la inversión, desde la demanda por el riesgo, porque faltan pruebas de seguridad para los productos, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en el caso de los automóviles, cuando surgieron, pues había muchas incertidumbres si los carros eran seguros después de haber utilizado caballos como un medio de transporte, ¿no? Entonces, ¿qué papel podrían jugar ahí las instituciones y cuál es el detonador en esta coevolución entre la tecnología y las instituciones? ¿Sería la economía la que tendrá que dar la respuesta o las ciencias sociales en general en otros ámbitos para poder complementar esto? Gracias.
Bueno, es seguro, por ejemplo, la regulación, ¿no? La regulación está hecha para asegurarse que los consumidores pueden tener ventajas de una nueva tecnología, ¿no? Y que no corran demasiados riesgos, ¿no? O sea, y también tiene que ser diseñada con criterios que permiten de crear reglas que se aplican para el bienestar de todos los ciudadanos. Entonces, describí ayer, por ejemplo, lo que estaba sucediendo en los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Con el caso de Boeing, ¿no? Donde la introducción de un nuevo sistema de software para hacer funcionar un tipo de avión había sido decidida demasiado temprano. Y no digo que sea la causa, pero resulta que el tipo que coordinaba el proceso era un ex empleado de Boeing, ¿no? Entonces un criterio de base es de distinguir lo que crea las reglas y los que son los objetos sobre los cuales las reglas se aplican, ¿no? Pero hay más aspectos, ¿no? Claramente, ¿no? Porque, por ejemplo, por lo que se refiere al mercado del trabajo, ¿no? O simplemente, digamos, bueno, la presencia, supongamos, de sistemas de seguro médico y cosas de este tipo, ¿no? Que, entre otras cosas, mejoran la calidad, ¿no? del trabajo y la educación en particular, ¿no? Ahora, mañana voy a hablar mucho más de la educación y del papel que jugaba en este proceso de desarrollo económico, ¿no? Y naturalmente después hay, digamos, instituciones que tienen que compensar un poco lo que es un vicio intrínseco, sea de la innovación que de la educación. Que depende de cómo está. La innovación crea mucho bienestar potencial, pero no bien distribuido. Entonces, depende de las instituciones cómo se distribuye el bienestar. Claro, esto es muy importante. Por ejemplo, al límite se puede tratar, ¿no? de dar subsidios a ciertas personas que son un poco las víctimas de la destrucción creatriz, ¿no? O creative destruction. Entonces, y mismo para, digamos, el mismo funcionamiento de las tecnologías no se puede hacerlas funcionar sin instituciones, ¿no? Supongamos, considerando los teléfonos portátiles, ¿no? Bueno, pueden utilizar solo ciertos intervalos de frecuencia, ¿no? Y hay una institución que se ocupa de definir todos los intervalos de frecuencia que se pueden utilizar, ¿no? De hecho, la oficina central está en Sofía Antípolis, ¿no? Cerca de una institución de investigación donde yo trabajé un poco de tiempo, pero esto es justo un caso, ¿no? Porque hay la Federal Aviation Administration en los Estados Unidos que tiene que ocuparse de la seguridad de los aviones y del transporte aéreo. Entonces, hay diferentes tipos de instituciones que de necesidad, ¿no? Son, digamos, participan, ¿no? a la emergencia y la utilización de nuevas tecnologías y de nuevos campos de la industria.
¿Qué tal, profesor? Soy Carlos Vilchis de UAM Iztapalapa y yo tengo una pequeña pregunta. Pensándolo para el caso latinoamericano, para realizar estudios, dadas nuestras propias circunstancias y nuestras propias estructuras y demás, sobre el cambio estructural. Mi pregunta va enfocada principalmente a preguntar si en este cambio estructural tiene o no una participación el ente estatal, es decir, el Estado, ¿no? Y en dado caso que sí entrara como un agente, ¿cuál tendría que ser su participación? Porque hay dos posturas. Una de ellas es que el Estado siempre tiene que ser un agente que únicamente se dedique a crear las condiciones para realizar el cambio, por ejemplo, en la cultura, en las instituciones, etcétera. Pero por otro lado también existe en una rama de la literatura que el Estado en países en vías de desarrollo tiene que asumirse como un agente promotor, ¿no? Promotor del cambio tecnológico, del cambio de los sistemas económicos que constituyen al propio sistema, impulsando desde sus propias fuentes la innovación, ¿no? O sea, pensándolo, impulsando la innovación desde centros de investigación, universidades públicas, etcétera. Entonces, más o menos va por ese rumbo mi pregunta.
El Estado juega siempre un papel fundamental. No era solo la imaginación de ciertos economistas y políticos a partir de los años 80 que imaginaba de poder eliminar al Estado, que fuera completamente inútil, ¿no? Ahora, no siempre lo hace bien, ¿no? Pero hay ciertas cosas que el Estado tiene que hacer, ¿no? O sea, en el caso específico, por ejemplo, de países en vía de desarrollo, ¿no? O sea, cuando una tecnología ha sido creada en otros países, ¿no? Y hay que absorberla, digamos, como en el ciclo de vida de esta tecnología hay una creación de barreras que aumentan en el tiempo, ¿no? Entonces, cuando uno parte un poco atrás, ya tiene una barrera más alta que los primeros innovadores, ¿no? Y entonces es más difícil, por ejemplo, entrar a un mercado internacional, ¿no? O sea, esto que era digamos lo que se llamaba la lógica del infant industry argument, ¿no? Que el Estado tiene que proteger la producción y la innovación hasta cierto punto, ¿no? Ahora, ha habido, después de los años 80, ¿no?, una pérdida de reputación de la import substitution industrialization, sustitución de importaciones, ¿no? Debido al hecho que en ciertos países no había funcionado bien, ¿no? Y la razón por la cual no había funcionado bien, que se crean unos enlaces un poco viciosos entre políticos e industriales, por lo cual un industrial no está nunca listo, ¿no?, para poder enfrentarse a la competencia del mercado mundial, ¿no? Y entonces lo que era la infant industry argument se transformó en la retiree industry argument, ¿no?, que uno llegaba hasta la madurez o la pensión, ¿no? Por eso que no ha funcionado. Pero, digamos, hay un libro de Daniel Ulrich, publicado en el año 2007, One Economics, Many Recipes, ¿no? Que en una página dice: todos los países que han tenido más éxito en desarrollo económico después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, ¿no?, han aplicado sin ninguna excepción la sustitución de importaciones. Pero la han aplicado mejor que Brasil o Argentina, ¿no? Entonces, han parado el proceso de protección de la producción a un cierto punto. Corea del Sur lo ha hecho explícitamente, ¿no? Ha subvencionado la producción hasta cierto punto. Después un día le dijo a los industriales: señores, ahora se olviden de eso, ¿no? Si quieren, podemos ayudarlos a exportar. Pero exportar es algo diferente, en el sentido que no pueden producir productos que no son competitivos con el mercado mundial, ¿no? Y entonces, aunque el Estado haya seguido ayudando y todo, ¿no?, no más la producción, entonces supieron, ¿no?, cómo desplazarse a una condición que le permitió de llegar no solo a ser competitivos, ¿no?, con otros productos que ya estaban, sino a transformarse en líderes en algunos sectores, ¿no? Entonces, claro, el Estado tiene un papel, no se puede eliminar, pero tiene que hacerlo bien. No todos los estados. Otro ejemplo, hay un estado en Arabia Saudita, pero el estado de Arabia Saudita ha estado muy contento de estar sentado sobre una tierra que estaba llena de petróleo por debajo. Si uno hacía un huequito, en pocos metros de profundidad encontraba petróleo, le llegaba un montón de dinero porque preocuparse de hacer investigación, de mirar a largo plazo. Ahora están tratando de cambiar a grande velocidad porque se han dado cuenta, ¿no?, que este modelo ya no puede funcionar, ¿no?, en el tiempo, ¿no? Entonces sí, el Estado es importante, pero tiene que hacer lo que es necesario que haga. O sea, no todos los estados lo hacen bien. O sea,
gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la presentación, y recojo los comentarios de los compañeros porque en buena parte están vinculados con la inquietud que tengo. En efecto, el Estado tiene un papel, ¿sí? Y es un papel muy, muy importante porque determina cómo se establecen cada una de las relaciones. Sin embargo, también tiene un papel limitado porque ahora estamos en un mundo que está globalizado, que está inmerso en cadenas globales de valor, y que efectivamente uno no está en los sistemas, bueno, o mejor dicho, no se inserta en las cadenas que quiere, sino en las que puede. Sí. Entonces, desde ahí, tengo algún conflicto con el tema de la diversificación, ¿sí?, como una estrategia para los países en vías de desarrollo. No porque no sea factible o porque no esté en las capacidades, sino porque median relaciones de poder que no siempre permiten la inserción en ese tipo de actividades. Por ejemplo, con Marcela hicimos un análisis recientemente para las empresas de biotecnología y fue una de las cosas que resultó muy, muy evidente. Entonces, claro, si median estas relaciones de poder, también me surge una duda alrededor de la causalidad. Es decir, los países más desarrollados son más diversificados y por eso consiguieron ese nivel de desarrollo. O fue primero de la diversificación y entonces luego consiguieron ese nivel de desarrollo. Porque para nosotros, que siempre estamos viendo cómo hacer para estar mejor, sí, ese link de causalidad tiene una importancia fundamental.
Bueno, nosotros investigamos un poco este problema, pero después lo dejamos, no porque teníamos otros problemas que queríamos investigar, ¿no? Pero en un sentido, empezamos diciendo que si un país, por ejemplo, tiene que introducir ciertas nuevas tecnologías en su sistema económico, pero lo hace comenzando bastante tarde, ¿no?, cuando otros países han creado estas nuevas tecnologías e industrias y ya las han desarrollado hasta cierto punto, y entonces se han creado barreras, ¿no? Barreras que son de tipo industrial o tecnológica, como por ejemplo la introducción de economías de escala, pero aún más, ¿no?, de conocimientos que se acumulan, entonces que no son fácilmente disponibles a todo el mundo, y así, ¿no? O sea, entonces la barrera no es solo, digamos, tecnológica, sino institucional, ¿no? Porque si uno necesita, por ejemplo, instituciones que son complementarias con respecto a las tecnologías, ¿no?, las dos en conjunto constituyen una barrera más grande que solo la tecnología. Entonces pueden amplificar el atraso y la dificultad de entrar, ¿no? En un segundo paper, entonces, tratamos de ver cómo se hubiera podido entrar, pero todavía no teníamos, por ejemplo, esta Global Supply Chains, que es lo de que estaba hablando, ¿no? O sea, y en ausencia de esto, vimos que, por ejemplo, no se puede llegar a llegar a un full catching up, ¿no?, alcanzar completamente los países desarrollados solo bajando el costo del trabajo. ¿Okay? Si uno típicamente entra en la industria textil, como se hace típicamente siempre la primera, ¿no?, porque no necesita grandes competencias ni nada, ¿no?, pero no llega a un alcance total. Entonces hay que comenzar a invertir. Y algunos países lo han hecho, ¿no? No es imposible. Lo que está pasando con la Global Supply Chain, sí, puede ser una dificultad en ningún sentido, pero, digamos, se puede entrar en esta supply chain si uno no solamente, digamos, puede producir a bajo costo, ¿no? Sino que tiene una gama de competencias, ¿no? Que son útiles y mejores de países que ya están allá. Puede ser que sea un poco más difícil, pero yo no creo que sea algo perdido. Pero lo que hay que decir, ¿no? Es que ha habido una globalización, ¿no? Que yo creo no va a pararse, ¿no? En la cual, digamos, ciertos países no han logrado, ¿no? Introducirse, ¿no? En estas global supply chains, ¿no? Entonces podría haber la necesidad de más regulación internacional, ¿no? Porque de hecho la globalización ha creado mucho bienestar y mucha riqueza, ¿no? Pero también ha creado mucha gente que sufrió, que son la base de todos estos movimientos populistas que nos está arruinando la vida ahora, ¿no? Con alguna razón, ¿no? Porque la gente que perdió, por ejemplo, en ese sentido, perdió el empleo, o simplemente que vio su sueldo que no aumentaba durante 30 o 40 años, mientras que veía los otros que se compraban autos, coches de lujo y que daban la vuelta al mundo para hacer vacaciones, ¿no? O sea, sí, es una dificultad, pero yo no creo que sea algo insuperable, ¿no? O sea, y depende siempre también, digamos, de la clase política local, depende también un poco de la presencia de recursos naturales, ¿no? Como usted sabe, ha habido una literatura sobre la maledición de los recursos naturales, ¿no? Arabia Saudita es digamos, que no es tanto maledición porque no estaban tan mal, ¿no? Económicamente, ¿no? Pero ahora se encuentran que si no cambian su modelo van a tener problemas, ¿no? O sea, entonces, en un sentido es mejor no tener tantos recursos naturales porque uno tiene que hacer funcionar más el cerebro.
Bueno, Daniel, por favor.
Sí, muchas gracias, Daniel de la UAM. Xochimilco, me parece muy interesante el enfoque y, digamos, el planteamiento en el plano teórico, porque efectivamente permite revisar desde otro punto de vista la evolución, históricamente hablando, la evolución de la economía y el desarrollo económico de algunos países con base en una noción clara de enfoque de cambio estructural, o quizá incluso de algunos sectores. Pero justamente en el día de hoy, la preocupación me parece que es mucho más amplia, porque al fin, digamos, si retomo tal cual metodológicamente el enfoque, digamos, los mercados ya no tienen fronteras, y quizá las cadenas de valor, por ejemplo, no se pueden cernir a un solo país o a un conjunto de países. Y entonces, por ejemplo, la reflexión sobre la diversificación en un solo país es mucho más compleja, porque ahora lo que se diversifican son las cadenas de valor en distintos países. Y las demandas del mercado para un solo bien o un solo producto o un solo sector no se especifica exclusivamente en un solo país, sino en muchos países a la vez. Y ahora tenemos productos universales que se venden al mismo precio en distintos países y que se elaboran con componentes que vienen de distintos lugares del planeta. Entonces, digamos, ahí tengo una especie de conflicto metodológico, si quiero utilizar el enfoque, ¿no? Tal como lo planteas, porque desde la perspectiva del diseño de políticas, ¿dónde aplico la política? ¿A una cadena de valor, a un sector, a un país, ¿no? O cómo analizo el cambio estructural, las normas y las regulaciones para un sector, para un tipo de producto, cuando en realidad el bien, como un automóvil, se elabora en distintas partes del planeta, y entonces la regulación aplica a todos esos países y no a un solo país. Entonces, digamos, el papel del Estado se desdibuja desde esta perspectiva, o el análisis empírico de la coevolución, cambio estructural, desarrollo económico, se me hace un poquito mucho más compleja de aprehender, porque no es un solo país o un mercado, un nicho de mercado, sino es todo el planeta. Entonces, digamos, ahí metodológicamente, ¿cómo lo resuelvo?
Yo creo que la tendencia a la diferenciación va a seguir. La globalización se está parando un poco. Y lo que yo leí, las proyecciones que leí, es que no va a desaparecer completamente, el uso de global supply chains no va a desaparecer, pero va a transformarse a un nivel más regional, no de una región que está al interior de nación-estados, sino una serie de naciones, por ejemplo, y que va a ser menos global. No sé si esto pueda producir más control, pero yo creo que hay también una necesidad, yo estoy hablando desde el punto de vista de países europeos que reciben muchísima inmigración, de países africanos, por ejemplo, ¿no? Que son mucho más pobres, por ejemplo, y que no logran, digamos, comenzar su proceso de desarrollo, digamos, más que a vender, qué sé yo, cacao, minerales o cosas de este tipo, y un poco de productos agrícolas. Yo lo que podría ver es la necesidad de tener proyectos conjuntos, no de ayuda, ¿no? Porque yo creo que los proyectos de ayuda al desarrollo no han servido absolutamente a nada, porque no llegan nunca en los bolsillos de lo que necesitan, ¿no? Terminan siempre en personas que no necesitaban y no han logrado ni llevar un solo país al desarrollo, ¿no? Puede ser a moderar un poco la pobreza, ¿no? Sino de concebir proceso de inversión conjunta, ¿no? En que se pueda tener una ventaja relativa para los dos, ¿no? Y por ejemplo que permitiría, digamos, a países que reciben mucha inmigración de controlarla un poco más, no de eliminarla, porque yo no estoy contra la inmigración, ¿no? Sino, por ejemplo, de utilizar proyectos de inversión conjunta que podrían también ser utilizadas para introducir en ciertas global supply chain, o si son regional supply chain, países que no han logrado hacerlo hasta cierto punto. Podría ser uno de los mecanismos, ¿no? Que se pueden poner a funcionar, ¿no? O simplemente tener más tipos de regulaciones internacionales, ¿no? Que, digamos, tienen un poco más de disciplinas en eso, ¿no? Porque si no, sí, yo sé que es algo que hasta ahora no ha sido, digamos, disponible a todo el mundo, ¿eh? Pero creo que el proceso de diferenciación va a seguir independientemente de la manera en que se organiza este nivel, ¿no? Va a ser más o menos rápido. No digo que vaya a durar indefinidamente, porque a cierto momento puede ser que uno va a perder el interés, ¿no? Para esto, ¿no? Pero hay todavía muchas partes del planeta, ¿no? Que consumen muy poco, una variedad muy limitada, ¿no? En los cuales se podrá hacer aumentar la diferenciación de productos, adaptándolos a las condiciones locales.
Bueno, tenemos dos últimas preguntas, una por acá y ya tenemos una asignada acá.
Bueno, mi pregunta va en el sentido de las últimas dos preguntas, es decir, la corriente evolucionista sobre todo ha centrado su análisis dentro de las naciones.
Sí.
Y entonces la interacción que existen entre las instituciones, los empresarios, etcétera, las políticas macro, micro, etcétera. Entonces, cuando estamos hablando de una globalización y donde estamos viendo que esas diferenciaciones, esos cambios radicales están ocurriendo en países desarrollados, pero no necesariamente esos países desarrollados están aprovechando toda esa innovación, porque al llevar la producción a otros sitios, pues digamos la demanda laboral se traslada a otros sitios. Entonces, eso es lo que están sufriendo hoy los países desarrollados, sí. Altas tasas de desempleo. Y, por ejemplo, ayer tú mencionabas el caso de Italia, de cómo los distritos industriales se han visto afectados porque, muchas de las cosas que se producían regionalmente y que además significaban una identidad de cultura y todo, se ha ido como desdibujando. Entonces, digamos, yo acabo de ver que ahora en lugar de decir Made in China, dice Designed in Italy, Made in China. O sea, como que quieren hacer la referencia de eso, o sea, el conocimiento se ha desarrollado en Italia, pero se ha producido en China. Entonces, yo creo que todavía falta un análisis mucho más profundo sobre los efectos que está dando esta parte de estas cadenas globales de producción sobre la dinámica de la innovación y los efectos en el empleo y en el desarrollo económico. Porque, por ejemplo, ahora se dice, lo que no había ocurrido es que ya se empiezan a ver desigualdades en países como Alemania, como Estados Unidos, como Inglaterra, etcétera, y que, digamos, si bien es cierto, países como China, como Corea avanzaron y su PIB per cápita aumentó, también subsisten desigualdades. Entonces, ¿cómo explicar esta parte? Me parece que una de las cosas en las cuales los países industrializados han tratado de controlar un poco las regulaciones a partir de los sistemas de propiedad intelectual. Sí, sí. Entonces, digamos, de tener el control pero son las empresas las que están haciendo esto fundamentalmente, aunque negocian los gobiernos, de tal manera que la riqueza de todos esos nuevos productos se concentra en las empresas transnacionales, pero no se va a distribuir al resto de la población. Entonces, yo creo que esa es una parte de instituciones globales, ¿verdad?, que está marcando muy claramente quién es el que debe de apropiarse de la innovación.
Bueno, son varias preguntas. Ahora, la última es, estas empresas que se han transformado en una potencia, son principalmente en realidad empresas de los Estados Unidos, ¿no?, y que están concentradas en problemas recientes ligados a la tecnología de la información y telecomunicación, ¿no?, a la inteligencia artificial, por ejemplo, a Google, los que llaman las gafas en Francia, ¿no?, o sea, que tienen un poder, digamos, enorme sobre todo el mundo, y que ha considerado también, digamos, en ambientes que son favorables al capitalismo. Por ejemplo, el Economist admite que esto sea un problema del capitalismo moderno, esta potencia inmensa de no de todas las empresas multinacionales, sino de un número muy limitado, ¿no?, que prácticamente no tienen rivales, ¿no? El único país que ha reaccionado en ese sentido es China, ¿no?, porque como es tan grande, ha logrado, por ejemplo, crear sus propias, digamos, compañías parecidas a Google, a Facebook, ¿no? Esto es seguro un problema importante. Yo creo que, bueno, hay necesidad de regulación a varios niveles, ¿no? A varios niveles porque también ahora lo que está pasando con estas tecnologías es diferente con respecto a las tecnologías de la era mecánico-química, ¿no? O sea, lo que se llama digital privacy, ¿no? Estas compañías están acumulando datos sobre todo el mundo, sobre todos los aspectos, ¿no?, sin pedir permiso. Yo creo que se necesita una legislación. Hasta ahora, digamos, la Unión Europea tiene la legislación más avanzada, ¿no?, sobre los derechos de los consumidores, de la privacy, etcétera. Pero es difícil decir si va a ser suficiente, porque son tecnologías que cambian a una velocidad por la cual en 10 años puede ser que uno tenga que escribir reglas completamente nuevas, ¿no? Otra cosa que mencionaste, derechos de propiedad intelectuales, ¿no? Esto es claro que
no es todo el mundo occidental, son los Estados Unidos, que en los años 1990, cuando Japón parecía ser el competidor más poderoso de los Estados Unidos, comenzaron a pensar que el Japón le había robado propiedad intelectual, por ejemplo, produciendo maquinaria, ¿no?, que utilizaba tecnologías que habían sido creadas en el campo militar en los Estados Unidos y aplicándola, por ejemplo, a la economía, etc. Y este miedo, si se puede llamar, ¿no?, los condujo a reforzar los derechos de propiedad intelectual en una manera que yo encuentro sea excesiva, porque al principio también habían reforzado el sistema de patentes, dando patentes para hacer análisis, por ejemplo, del patrimonio genético, ¿no?, de particulares especies, ¿no?, que no era, digamos, las condiciones para dar una patente es que tiene que ser original, ¿no?, y que tiene que tener una aplicación industrial. En aquellos años, ya los métodos no eran originales, se habían transformado en casi rutinas y no tenían todavía ninguna aplicación industrial, ¿no? Entonces era verdaderamente la tentativa de reforzar el sistema de patentes, ¿no?, y también de aplicarlo a todos los países del mundo, a cualquier nivel de desarrollo económico que fueran, ¿no?, con los acuerdos TRIPS, etc., ¿no? Yo creo que había cosas que eran un poco excesivas ahí que tendrían que ser cambiadas, ¿no? O sea, porque en realidad, digamos, hay dudas, hay gente que llega a decir hoy que las patentes son solo, digamos, un obstáculo a la innovación, que en realidad no se justifican más. Puede ser un poco excesivo, pero, por ejemplo, también cuando tú necesitas que investir mucho para imitar, si tú tienes que investir tanto como el primer innovador, entonces la patente no tiene ninguna razón de existir. Hay una barrera que es haber estado ahí antes, ¿no? Porque ahora, si al revés un imitador tiene que invertir mucho menos, ¿no?, entonces puede haber una lógica en decir que por un poco de tiempo tiene que pagar, ¿no?, derechos de propiedad intelectuales y todo, ¿no? O sea, entonces hay varios, yo creo que, digamos, el problema más importante es, esto se puede, digamos, cambiar un poco, ¿no?, reducir la rigidez de algunas de las regulaciones de derechos de propiedad, pero ¿qué vamos a hacer con estas compañías que se están transformando en los dueños del mundo? O sea, se podría decir que una compañía que ejerce sus actividades a nivel mundial tiene que tener una legislación que no favorece ningún país en particular, que tiene que ser verdaderamente internacional, ¿no?, en vez de ser centrada en un país y que tener tentáculos en todo el mundo. Pero no sé cuánto fácil sea de introducir algo de este tipo.
Sí. Buenas tardes, doctor. Yo soy estudiante de la Maestría en Estudios Sociales de la UAM Iztapalapa y mi pregunta es muy breve. ¿Cuál será la conveniencia de llevar todo este enfoque metodológico de evolucionismo hacia adentro de los países? Porque aquí se ha hablado acerca de estudiarlo desde los países desarrollados y subdesarrollados, pero dentro de los países es una dinámica que también existe. Solamente basta voltear a ver lo que sucede en Estados Unidos, en la región de los Grandes Lagos, y ahora hacia la región del sur, cercana a la frontera de México. Entonces la pregunta es, ¿cuál sería la conveniencia de introducir el concepto de territorio y estudiar las características peculiares de este concepto en este enfoque evolucionista? Esa sería toda la pregunta.
Hay una literatura sobre estudios regionales, ¿no?, que yo no tuve el tiempo de mencionar, pero si busca, hay muchísimo, ha sido una rama de la literatura que se ha desarrollado a grande velocidad, ¿no?, que al principio, ¿no?, cuando yo vi estos artículos que aparecían sobre estudios regionales, no me interesa mucho, ¿no?, pero en realidad ha aumentado muchísimo, ¿no?, el número de estudios. Y yo fui a una conferencia de estas sobre estudios regionales en Barcelona el año pasado, ¿no?, y verdaderamente es como una nueva disciplina, ¿no?, que se está desarrollando. Entonces hay mucho trabajo, ¿no?, que se hace sobre esto. Yo no lo conozco bien, esta literatura, un poco por lo que se refiere a la medición de la variedad, del papel de la variedad a nivel regional, ¿no? Pero hay una literatura bastante importante que se está desarrollando. ¿Okay?
Muchas gracias a todos. Yo creo que hemos tenido una excelente sesión, una presentación que le agradecemos mucho, profesor, y bueno, a todos también por su asistencia. El día de mañana les recuerdo que estaremos en el posgrado de la Facultad de Economía de 4 a 7 de la tarde en el salón 207. Los esperamos y bueno, hasta mañana.